Why did they laugh? Maybe because she didn't fit the picture in their minds: small frame, calm eyes, too quiet for the noise of a battlefield. Yet the air around her seemed to know something they didn't, something waiting to unfold. The Virginia beach wind carried salt from the Chesapeake, brushing past the firing range where the recruits stood shoulder to shoulder, half smirking, half curious. They were Navy SEAL candidates, men hardened by surf, sand, and sleepless drills, and they couldn't believe who'd just been introduced as their cross-training partner. Sergeant Raina Voss, Army sniper, 28 years old, 5'4". One of them whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "That little girl thinks she can outshoot SEALs." Laughter rippled across the range, bouncing off the concrete barricades and steel targets. She didn't flinch, didn't look up. She just adjusted the scope on her M24A3, the .338 Lapua variant, resting steady against her shoulder, her hands moving with quiet precision. 12 hours from now, those same men would be staring at her through disbelief, remembering this moment, the laughter, and wishing they stayed silent. But for now, the noise was theirs. Raina's hair caught the morning light, strands whipping loose from her bun as the wind shifted. She exhaled, slow, controlled. The rifle was almost alive beneath her touch, metal warmed by sun, barrel humming faintly from a test round she'd fired earlier. Her spotter wasn't here. This wasn't combat, just a training evolution. Yet something about the tension felt familiar, that blend of being underestimated and unseen, the weight of needing to prove herself again, even after everything she'd already survived. 6 years as an Army sniper, 2 tours in Afghanistan, a commendation for precision fire under extreme pressure. None of it mattered to them. The SEAL instructors stood in the observation post, eyes hidden behind black sunglasses, clipboard in hand. She could sense their watchfulness, their evaluation not just of her aim, but of how she handled being dismissed. She learned long ago that silence was its own kind of weapon. The chatter behind her continued. "Maybe we should move her target closer," one candidate joked. "Yeah," another said, "give her a fair chance." Raina breathed once more, adjusted windage 2 clicks left. She didn't respond. The sound of the bolt sliding home was her answer, a clean, confident, metallic click that cut through their laughter. The first shot broke the air like a heartbeat, clean, tight, and final. At 800 meters, the target's red marker light blinked instantly. She sent the second round before anyone could speak, then a third. By the fifth, the air had gone utterly still. Through the scope, she saw nothing but a single ragged hole, where all 5 rounds had touched the same point of impact. Silence replaced mockery, not the kind that came from respect yet, the kind that comes from confusion, from watching something you don't understand. She stood, ejected the spent magazine, and laid the rifle on the bench with care, as if returning it to rest. No smile, no gloat, just that same calm that unnerved them all. Inside, though, something small flickered, not pride, not even satisfaction, just relief. Because every time she stepped onto a new range, it was like the slate of her worth got wiped clean, and she had to carve it all over again. Later, when the instructor announced the next evolution, she kept to the edge of the group, studying diagrams and wind charts. The SEAL candidates moved with practiced confidence, loud, sure, already bonded. She could feel their camaraderie like a wall she couldn't climb. It wasn't new. She felt it years ago, standing outside the Fort Benning sniper school barracks, clutching her rifle case while 2 male trainees walked by, whispering that the slot should have gone to someone who could actually drag a wounded man off a hill. She dragged a 230-pound man off a hill 6 months later, her own spotter, Chen, hit by shrapnel during a mortar barrage in Ghazni province. She remembered his blood soaking through her sleeves, the metallic scent of it mixing with dust. Remembered holding her position for 6 more hours while the medevac hovered somewhere beyond range, her finger steady on the trigger even as her own hands trembled from exhaustion. She learned early that the hardest part of soldiering wasn't shooting, it was waiting. Waiting for respect. Waiting for silence to mean something. Waiting for the chance to prove you didn't need anyone's permission to belong. That night back in the armory, she cleaned her rifle alone. The other candidates gathered in their team room, laughter echoing through the concrete walls. She could hear them, Mitchell, the loudest one, talking about how the Army probably sent her as a PR stunt. Political placement, someone said. They're checking boxes now. Her hands stilled. She stared at her reflection in the rifle's bolt, faint, warped, tired. She didn't blame them. Not really. They'd never been given a reason to believe otherwise. Her grandfather's voice drifted into memory, rough, steady, comforting. The Texas desert stretching out before them, air shivering with heat mirage. He'd been a Marine Scout sniper in Vietnam, and he never once told her the rifle was too heavy, never told her to find a different dream. Excellence, he used to say, is its own argument. She could still see him sitting on that wooden porch outside Marfa, cleaning his Remington 700 while coyotes howled in the distance. That's where she'd learned to breathe through her heartbeat, to let the rhythm of her pulse align with the squeeze of the trigger. By 12, she could hit prairie dogs at 300 meters. By 16, she was reading the wind off distant rocks like others read a map. Now, years later, in this sterile armory under fluorescent lights, she missed that simple kind of quiet, the kind that didn't need to prove anything. Her fingers traced the etched numbers on her scope, 3.515x50, precision glass, the same kind she'd used on her longest confirmed shot, 1,270 meters in Afghanistan, a target that existed for barely a second before vanishing behind a rock outcrop. She made the shot between gusts, heart beating once, twice, then stillness. That single round had saved an entire platoon. But none of that was written anywhere these men could read. So she cleaned her weapon, checked her optics, and prepared for the morning exercise. If she failed even once, it would confirm every whisper. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, tapping against the armory roof. She didn't mind. The sound of rain always helped her think. She opened the operation plan again, a mock hostage rescue scenario. Multiple moving targets, strict rules of engagement, live ammunition under safety protocols. The sniper's job, her job, was overwatch. Identify, prioritize, neutralize. Simple on paper. She memorized the compound layout, the distances, the angles. 700 meters from overwatch to breach. 3 known hostile positions. What she didn't know was that the instructors planned a change. An unannounced curve meant to test improvisation. At 500, darkness still wrapped the training grounds. The air smelled of salt and wet metal. Raina lay prone behind her rifle, gloved finger tracing the edge of the trigger guard. The night vision scope glowed faint green. Her breath fogged in the cold. The SEAL assault team moved through the shadows ahead, ghost-like, disciplined. Her comms crackled once, then silence. Wind 8 miles per hour from the west. Steady, her spotter whispered through the headset, a SEAL assigned temporarily to her for the exercise. Hold that value. Copy, she murmured. The first simulated threat appeared in her scope, a faint outline behind a ventilation unit 850 meters out. She logged it mentally, adjusted for elevation. The second popped briefly in a window, 900 meters, predictable route. But the third wasn't there. Seconds stretched. Then Mitchell's voice came through, tight now, all trace of humor gone. Viper 6 taking simulated fire from unknown position. Her scope panned left, right, nothing. Then a flicker. Heat mirage shifting unnaturally near the razor wire, 1,100 meters, almost invisible. Her breath slowed. The crosswind gusted unpredictably. This was it, the kind of shot that made or ended reputations. 3 hostiles had to be neutralized simultaneously for the assault team to advance without triggering the mock explosives. 30 seconds. She loaded 5 rounds. Her mind narrowed to a single point of calculation. Half-mil hold for the first, full mil for the second, 2 feet high and slight right for the third. First shot clean, 850 meters down. Second window shattered, role player eliminated. 12 seconds. The third, the impossible one. She waited for the mirage to flatten. Her grandfather's voice whispered through time, fire between heartbeats. She squeezed. The recoil lifted dust from the ground, muzzle flash brief against dawn light. 2 seconds later, signal confirmed, target hit. Her spotter let out a soft, unbelieving laugh. Holy hell. But there was no time. 2 more hostiles emerged, 900 and 1,000 meters moving. Reyna adjusted without thought, bolt, breathe, fire. Both hits. Then silence, the kind of silence that feels sacred. When Master Chief Brennan finally called exercise complete, she stayed prone, eyes still behind the scope. Through the lens she saw them, the men who'd laughed standing in the open, staring back toward her position. Helmets off, no one speaking. Respect didn't arrive with applause, it came in quiet. She packed her rifle slowly, careful, deliberate. Mitchell approached later, hesitant, helmet under his arm. His words were low, stripped of ego. "I was wrong," he said. "We all were." She just nodded. The wind shifted again, carrying salt and memory. For the first time all day, she allowed herself a small breath of satisfaction, not because she'd proven them wrong, but because she'd proven herself right. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout, it simply aims and acts. Why did the silence feel heavier than the laughter that came before it? When the last echo of her shot faded over the Virginia dunes, even the wind seemed to hesitate. Reyna Voss remained still, cheek resting against the rifle stock, eyes tracing the distant horizon where smoke from the training targets curled upward. The compound smelled faintly of burnt powder and wet sand. For a long moment no one spoke. Then radios crackled with post-exercise chatter, clipped voices, reports, confirmations. But beneath the noise was something else. A shift. Respect had entered the frequency. She gathered her brass casings one by one, pocketing them out of habit. They clinked softly together, 5 small reminders that skill could rewrite perception, that silence could silence arrogance. By the time she returned to the observation post, the others had already begun disassembling their gear. Mitchell stood near the debrief tent, head down, lips pressed tight as he replayed the morning's events in his mind. When he finally looked up, their eyes met, not in apology yet, but in recognition. He walked toward her, slow and deliberate. "That shot," he began, voice lower now, stripped of bravado, 1,100 meters. She nodded, give or take a few. He hesitated. "We couldn't even see him." "That's why I could." The corner of her mouth lifted, not a smile exactly, just acknowledgement. He laughed once under his breath, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess I won't be joking about moving anyone's targets closer anymore." Reyna didn't answer. Words weren't her medium, precision was. She just kept walking toward the tent where Master Chief Brennan waited with his clipboard. Inside, the debrief began like any other, structured, technical, unemotional. But when Brennan reached her section of the report, his tone changed. "Sergeant Voss," he said, setting down the clipboard. "In 22 years I've seen a lot of shooters. I've seen luck, I've seen skill. What you did out there wasn't either. It was mastery." Her posture didn't change. "Just did my job, Chief." He studied her for a long moment. "You did more than that. You shifted the air out there. You could feel it." She didn't respond, but he was right. You could feel it, the subtle turn when disbelief becomes belief, when mockery turns to awe. Brennan tapped his pen against the desk. "How'd you make that third shot? Crosswind was gusting like hell." Raina's answer came like she'd rehearsed it her whole life. Watched the mirage flatten, counted the gust rhythm, waited for the lull, fired between heartbeats. He smiled faintly. Classic. Then, after a pause, "You've got something they don't teach anymore, patience." She shrugged. "It's not patience, it's listening." Listening. She met his gaze. To the wind, the breathing, the math, and to what everyone's too loud to hear. Brennan leaned back, thoughtful. "That'll make a good lesson when you start teaching." Teaching. He flipped to the last page of his clipboard. "I'm extending your orders. You'll stay on as an exchange instructor. SEAL sniper training needs more eyes like yours." For a heartbeat, she didn't speak. Staying meant more scrutiny, more proving. But it also meant something else, a quiet chance to change the way they saw people like her. She nodded once, understood. Outside, the recruits were packing up. Mitchell and a few others approached, still cautious. The laughter was gone now, replaced by the awkwardness of men who'd realized they'd been wrong. Mitchell stopped a few feet away. "Hey, Sergeant." She looked up. He scratched the back of his head. "You staying for the next rotation?" "Looks like it." He nodded. "Good. Maybe you can, show us that wind-reading trick. I've been shooting 10 years and still can't get a clean read past 800. Raina tilted her head slightly. "Trick? It's not a trick, it's attention." Mitchell smirked. "Guess that's what I've been missing." She didn't disagree. The next week felt different. The same training compound, same cold mornings, but the air carried a new kind of silence, respectful, almost reverent. Where once they had stared at her with skepticism, now they watched with focus, curiosity, even admiration. She still ate alone most days, not because she wasn't welcome anymore, but because solitude had become her habit. Solitude was where she processed. It was where she found her calm. But sometimes she'd catch Mitchell or Peterson watching her during drills, trying to mirror her breathing rhythm or how she adjusted her scope between gusts. She didn't say anything. Let them learn through observation, the way she always had. One afternoon, after a long session of moving target drills, Mitchell approached her on the range. Sweat darkened his uniform, but his grin was genuine. "I tried your rhythm trick," he said. "Didn't miss a shot at 750. She raised an eyebrow. "Good, next try at 950, different story." He laughed. "Guess I'm not you yet." "You don't need to be," she said softly. "You just need to listen better." He frowned slightly. "To the wind." "To yourself," she said. He didn't understand yet, but he would. That night, Raina sat alone by the docks, the Chesapeake dark and quiet under a bruised purple sky. The base lights shimmered across the water like broken glass. She could hear distant laughter from the team rooms, that low, easy kind that only comes when men are unworried. She envied that sound sometimes, not because she wanted to be part of it, but because it belonged to a world she'd never fully enter, a world that didn't question belonging. She thought of Afghanistan again, of Sergeant Chen's voice on the comms, whispering through the static before everything went wrong. "You're good, Raina. Don't ever let them tell you otherwise." He died 2 weeks later in a roadside blast. She hadn't fired her rifle for days after that. The grief had been strange, not sharp, but heavy, like trying to breathe underwater. She'd only kept going because she couldn't imagine stopping. A gull screamed overhead, breaking her memory. She looked down at the M24 resting beside her, clean, oiled, ready. It wasn't just a weapon. It was the one thing that never lied to her. It didn't care about gender or reputation. It cared only about truth. Did you listen? Did you calculate? Did you execute? In a world full of noise, it was the only thing that answered honestly. The next morning, Brennan called her into his office again. He handed her a file stamped confidential joint training evaluation. Inside were photos from the previous exercise, performance charts, and a short paragraph written by him. "Read the last line," he said. She did. Sergeant Raina Voss demonstrated the finest display of precision marksmanship I've witnessed in 22 years of naval special warfare. She looked up. You didn't have to write that. I did, he said simply, because they need to read it. He paused, then added, You've got something rare, Voss. The ability to make people rethink their assumptions without saying a damn word. She met his eyes. It's not about rethinking, it's about seeing. He smiled faintly. You should write that down somewhere. Could make a good motto for this place. A week later it did. The SEAL training range, the same one where she'd been laughed at, now bore a small brass plaque near the 1,000-meter mark. It read, Dedicated to accuracy over assumption, in honor of Sergeant Raina Voss. She hadn't known about it until she walked past and saw the engraving. Someone, probably Brennan, had placed it quietly, without ceremony. That's how she preferred it. She stood there for a long time, watching sunlight glint off the metal. Then she touched the plaque once lightly and whispered, Grandpa, you were right. That night a new team arrived for rotation, younger, louder, fresh from Bud S. As she watched them unpack their rifles. Laughing, she saw herself years ago, standing on another range, another group of doubters around her. History, she thought, has a way of repeating unless someone changes its rhythm. And maybe that was her purpose now, not to prove but to teach, not to argue but to demonstrate. Later, under the hum of fluorescent lights in the classroom, she stood before the new trainees. Some of you, she began quietly, think this is about shooting. It's not. The room stilled. It's about patience, humility, control. You don't win because you're louder, faster, or stronger. You win because you understand silence. She let the words hang there. No one moved. Outside, the wind rattled the window frames. She glanced toward the glass, eyes soft but distant. Out there, wind and distance don't care what rank you wear or what branch you serve. They don't care who you are. They only respond to those who listen. Someone raised a hand. So how do you know when to fire? Raina looked back at them, her expression unreadable. When everything else stops arguing, she said. And for a long time after, no one in that room made a sound. How do you start over when you've already proven everything once? Raina asked herself that as the C-130 banked over North Carolina, its engines a low, constant growl beneath the night. The orders in her pocket were simple. Temporary duty assignment, 90 days, Fort Bragg. Trained Special Forces snipers in advanced wind reading and long-range engagement. Simple on paper. In life, it meant walking into another room full of strangers who would measure her before she spoke a word. She touched the worn edge of her grandfather's dog tag hanging under her collar. It was smooth from years of habit, a private anchor. Outside the window, the airfield lights slid by in thin golden lines. When the plane touched down, she felt that familiar quiet settle in her chest, the calm before introductions, before expectations. The next morning, the Carolina humidity wrapped around her like damp cloth. The range at Bragg was different from Little Creek. Pine trees at the perimeter, red clay underfoot, the distant thud of artillery practice somewhere beyond the ridge. She met the new cadre just after dawn. Sergeant Voss, the senior instructor, announced, reading from his roster. Army sends us one of their own this time. A few heads turned. She recognized the look, the curiosity that often turned to disbelief. Captain Roth, the training officer, shook her hand firmly. We've heard about that Little Creek shot. His tone was even, but his eyes carried a challenge. You plan on making any legends here? Just shooters, sir, she said. He gave a half smile. We'll see. The students, 12 men and 1 woman, watched her as she set her case on the bench and opened it. Inside lay the M24, its metal catching the light like a promise. She began assembling it piece by piece, speaking only when necessary. Today, she said quietly, we listen before we shoot. One of the younger soldiers, a broad-shouldered sergeant named Danner, frowned. "Ma'am, I thought this block was about advanced calculations." "It is," she replied. "Calculation starts with hearing what the environment is already telling you." He looked unconvinced. The others waited. She walked to the line and pointed toward the far berm. "The wind out there isn't constant. It's arguing with itself. If you fire without understanding its rhythm, your bullet's part of the noise." They followed her lead through the first volley. Within minutes, frustration showed, missed shots, muttered curses, scopes adjusting too late. When it was her turn, she lay prone, pressed cheek to stock, and let silence gather around her. One shot, dead center. No applause this time, just a stillness, the kind that follows when a truth lands heavier than words. By midday, the class moved from skepticism to respect. Danner approached her after cleanup, wiping sweat from his neck. "Sergeant, that thing you said about the wind arguing with itself, how do you know when it stops?" "You don't," she said. "You just decide when you're willing to listen longer than it's willing to fight you." He nodded slowly, not sure he understood, but feeling the weight of it anyway. That evening she walked the perimeter trail alone. The forest hummed with cicadas, a wall of sound that reminded her of the Afghan nights when insects filled the gaps between distant gunfire. She paused at a clearing where a small range flag snapped in the breeze. Her mind drifted again to Chen, to the call she never forgot. "We're pinned. Raina, do you have them?" She had them and still lost him. Grief had faded over the years, but not gone. It lived quietly in the pauses between breaths, in the half-second before every trigger squeeze. A voice behind her broke the memory. "You ever sleep, Voss?" She turned. Captain Roth stood a few paces back, hands in his pockets. "Sometimes," she said. He stepped closer. "I read your after-action reports. You've been in longer than most people twice your age. You ever think about taking a break?" She shook her head. "The day I stop wanting to learn is the day I put the rifle down." Roth studied her a moment, then said, "Good, because headquarters just handed us a field test. You'll like this one." Field test. The phrase carried weight more than routine training. He continued, "Joint exercise with Delta. Simulated hostage recovery but live fire conditions. You'll serve as Overwatch lead. They'll be watching how you integrate with other teams." Integration, the polite word for scrutiny. "When?" she asked. 48 hours. Back in her quarters, she spread the mission map across the desk. The compound layout looked familiar. 2 buildings, staggered elevations, limited visibility between sectors. She marked wind direction, possible mirage lines, fallback angles. But the technical part was what kept her awake. It was the weight of being the example, the one they'd all whisper about if anything went wrong. At 200, she finally leaned back in her chair and let exhaustion pull her under. The next dawn rose gray and heavy. On the range, the Delta operators prepped silently. These men didn't joke or posture. Their quiet carried a different texture, efficient, lethal, self-assured. Still, she saw the glances. Evaluation never stopped. Roth approached with a headset. "You'll have one spotter, Sergeant Gaines. You know the drill. 5 simulated hostiles, varied distances, moving patterns. We'll grade coordination and timing." She nodded, checking the rifle's bolt one last time. As she settled into position, Gaines muttered, "Heard stories about you, Voss. Good ones, I hope." "Depends who's telling them." She smiled faintly. "Then let's give them a better ending." The exercise began with the crack of a breech charge. Through her scope, shadows flickered, team movement, muzzle flashes. She called wind, adjusted, and dropped the first target. The second moved fast across an elevated catwalk. She tracked, fired, corrected mid-breath. "Hit." "Nice," Gaines whispered. Then static hissed in her headset. "Overwatch, be advised, unexpected contact, south building roof." She shifted scope. Nothing visible, only mirage bands trembling above hot tin. "Visual," Roth's voice came sharp. Negative, she replied. Seconds ticked. Then she saw it, a glint half hidden behind a vent pipe. She fired, hit. The exercise ended 42 seconds ahead of schedule. When she rose, her elbows and knees ached from the prone position, but her mind buzzed with that same calm electricity she always felt after a clean operation. Roth met her at the command tent, arms crossed. "You read the wind on that roof shot?" "Yes, sir." "Without spotter input?" "Yes, sir." He shook his head, half smiling. "You really do listen better than anyone else out here." She didn't answer. Compliments made her uneasy. They often came before distance. 2 weeks passed. The reports from the exercise circulated quietly through command channels. Words like exceptional, unprecedented, unflinching found their way onto official paper. One evening, Brennan called from Little Creek just to say, "Told you they'd figure it out." She almost laughed. "Not yet." He chuckled on the line, "Then keep them guessing." But something else was changing, subtly, beneath the professional rhythm. Roth began assigning her to briefings normally reserved for senior instructors. Danner started calling her ma'am with genuine respect. Even the cynics began asking for her opinion before pulling the trigger. Still, every night when she cleaned the M24, she felt a strange hollowness. Success didn't fill the quiet, it just echoed inside it. One afternoon, as she packed up after range, Roth approached again. His tone was different, measured, careful. "Voss, you ever think about why you keep ending up here? Always the test case, the one they send to prove a point." She met his gaze. "Because they still don't believe excellence can come in a different shape." He nodded slowly. "Maybe, or maybe because they know you won't waste the chance to show them." That night she sat outside her quarters with a mug of bitter coffee, watching storm clouds crawl over the horizon. The first drops began to fall, heavy and cold. She thought of every laugh she'd ignored, every dismissal she'd swallowed, and wondered if strength really came from silence, or if silence was just armor she'd forgotten how to take off. Lightning flashed once, reflecting off the rifle resting beside her chair. Tomorrow another mission brief, another stage, another audience. But she wasn't thinking about applause anymore. She was thinking about the cost of being right, the loneliness that followed victory, the weight of being the example no one dared challenge but no one truly knew. She finished her coffee, set the mug down, and whispered into the thunder, "Grandpa, how many times do I have to prove it?" The storm gave no answer, only the steady rhythm of rain against metal. And somewhere deep in the night, the faintest echo of his old advice returned, soft as breath, clear as memory. "Until you stop shooting to be seen and start shooting to understand." She closed her eyes. The words settled into her like aim finding its mark. Tomorrow she would start teaching differently. Not just the math, not just the wind, but the listening. How do you tell when training stops being training? For Raina, it happened quietly, not with alarms or orders, but with a single coded call delivered over a static-filled radio in the middle of a humid afternoon. She was halfway through a lesson on wind theory when Captain Roth appeared at the range edge. His expression told her everything before he spoke. "Voss inside now." The students looked up, confused. She set her rifle down, dusted her gloves, and followed him into the operations tent. Inside, a secure monitor glowed blue against the dim light. The words "real-world tasking" blinked on screen. Roth's voice was steady but tight. "This isn't an exercise. One of our forward teams in Syria went dark during a reconnaissance patrol near the Al-Raqqa corridor. 2 missing, 1 wounded, last known coordinates near a collapsed structure. Command wants Overwatch support for a quick extraction." Raina's pulse slowed, not racing, not panicking, just settling into that familiar rhythm she knew too well. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Because the nearest Overwatch unit's 40 miles out, and we've got your file." She looked at him, reading the unspoken truth. They wanted precision. They wanted calm. They wanted someone who didn't miss. When do we leave? 3 hours. Back in her quarters, she packed methodically: gloves, wind meter, extra batteries, spare optics, her grandfather's dog tag. Each item found its place as if rehearsed 100 times before. When she zipped the case, her reflection caught in the window, composed, efficient, unreadable. But inside, something else stirred, a tremor of unease she hadn't felt since the day Chen went down. She closed her eyes and breathed through it. "Not again," she whispered. "Not this time." The transport flight to Incirlik was silent except for the drone of engines. The team assigned to her, 2 medics, 3 operators, 1 communications tech, kept mostly to themselves. They all knew her name, though. Her reputation traveled faster than introductions. At dawn, they transferred to a forward staging base. The mission brief was simple in structure, brutal in implication. "Extraction point here," Roth said, pointing to a satellite image riddled with red outlines. "Collapsed structure with limited cover. Enemy presence light but unpredictable. Primary objective: recover Sergeant Hale and Petty Officer Vargas, both last pinged in this sector." Raina studied the map. Elevation. High ground to the north, 120 meters above. Overwatch window 300 degrees. Distance: 800 to primary, 1100 to southern approach. She nodded slowly. "We'll need daylight for accuracy." "You won't have it," Roth replied. "Night op, they move at 200. She met his gaze. "Then we bring our own light." He didn't ask what she meant, and she didn't explain. Not until she unpacked her scope later and began adjusting it for the faint thermal shimmer she could still read in starlight. As the team prepped vehicles, Gaines, her assigned spotter again, approached, chewing gum, looking uneasy. "You sure about this, Voss? Feels too soon. Intel's thin." She chambered around, testing the bolt. "We don't get to choose when the wind changes, just how long we listen before we shoot." He snorted softly. "You and your wind metaphors. They keep me alive." By the time they reached the Overwatch Ridge, the Syrian desert had turned silver under moonlight. The distant village was half ruined, silhouettes of broken walls, collapsed roofs, and twisted metal glinting faintly in the dark. Raina set up her rifle on a low rise of rock, angled perfectly toward the structure. She adjusted the bipod, checked the barrel temperature, and whispered into comms, "Raven 1 in position." "Copy that," came Roth's voice. "Assault team moving. You're green to engage on visual confirmation of hostiles only." "Understood." The desert wind carried a soft hiss, the sound of sand scraping across stone. She listened, counting the rhythm. 6 seconds strong, 3 seconds fade. It matched her breathing. Through the thermal scope, the world became ghosts and shadows, heat signatures flickering against cold ruin. Then she saw them. 3 bright forms moving cautiously near the collapsed building, the rescue team. And beyond them, faint but distinct, 2 stationary shapes deeper inside, the missing men. But something else caught her eye: movement behind the outer wall. Small, darting, low to the ground. "Movement west," she whispered. "Single hostile closing fast." "Copy marking." She tracked the figure, waited for the wind lull, fired once. The thermal bloom vanished. Seconds later, the comms crackled. "Contact neutralized. Continuing movement." Her hand tightened slightly on the grip. 1 down. Then in her earpiece, a sudden shout, static, then a half-cut scream. "Raven, we've got secondary contact. Roof east side." Her scope jumped. She found it instantly, muzzle flash from the second floor. She exhaled and fired. Another bloom of heat fell still. "Target down," she said flatly. The radio went quiet. She could hear her own heartbeat again, slow, deliberate, measured. "Team status." Roth's voice returned, clipped. "Hale recovered. Vargas unconscious but alive. We're pulling out." "Copy covering." As they moved, A ripple of thermal activity appeared at the southern edge, more movement than expected. 4, maybe 5 heat sources. Multiple hostiles incoming south, she called. Estimate distance: 1,100 meters. Too far for standard engagement in this wind, but not too far for her. Do it, Roth ordered. She adjusted elevation, windage. Mirage invisible in the dark, but she felt it in the subtle drag of air across her cheek. First shot hit. Second correction, then hit. Third delay, wind shift, then the faint flare of another target falling. The rest scattered. By the time the rescue team reached the exfil zone, the ridge was silent again. When the helicopter blades thudded overhead, Raina finally allowed her shoulders to relax. Her hands trembled slightly now, not from fear, but from the release of too much control held too long. Back at base, medics rushed the wounded inside. Roth met her near the landing pad, his face half-lit by the aircraft's strobes. "You saved them," he said quietly. She shook her head. "We all did." He studied her, still humble. "You know, most people would have celebrated." "I'll celebrate when no one has to die to prove I can do my job." He didn't have an answer for that. Later, alone in the armory tent, she sat cleaning the rifle again, the ritual that anchored her. The smell of solvent mixed with the desert air, the rhythmic scrape of the bore brush steadying her thoughts. But as she polished the bolt, a memory surfaced, Chen again, his voice echoing faint in her head. "You can't save everyone, Raina. Sometimes all you can do is make sure the ones who survive remember why." She paused, eyes wet without realizing it. The flap of the tent opened behind her. Gaines stepped in, his expression unreadable. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not after that." They sat in silence for a while, the desert wind whispering around them. Finally, he said, "When that second contact hit the roof, how did you find him so fast?" She looked at him, voice low. "I wasn't looking for him, I was listening." "To what?" "To fear. It makes people breathe different." He blinked, not sure if she was serious. She was. "Guess that's why you're the legend," he said finally. "I'm not a legend," she replied softly. "I'm a lesson." The next day, Command filed the operation report. 5 lives saved. 0 friendly casualties. The brass called it textbook. But to Raina, it was something else, a reminder that every shot carried a shadow, every success a silence. That night, as the desert cooled, she sat under the stars and stared at her rifle beside her. The wind had shifted again, cooler now, calmer. She whispered to the sky, half prayer, half confession. "Grandpa, I finally listened." For a moment, the night seemed to still, as if the world itself was pausing to hear her. And then softly, the wind answered, brushing past her cheek, carrying sand and solace alike. What happens when the noise stops, when the gunfire fades, and the only sound left is your own breathing? For Raina, silence had always been safety. It was where focus lived. But now, sitting alone in a transport plane headed back to the States, silence sounded different. Hollow. Heavy. It carried all the names she couldn't forget. Across the cargo bay, the operators slept in tangled postures, their weapons stowed, their faces slack from exhaustion. Roth sat near the bulkhead, writing a report under the dim red cabin light. Every few seconds, the pen scratched paper, then paused, a rhythm almost as steady as her own heartbeat. She looked down at her hands. They were steady again, too steady. It wasn't normal, she thought, how calm she could feel after what they'd done. 5 confirmed kills, 2 men saved, no friendly losses. Command would call it perfect, clean. But nothing ever felt clean. She reached into her jacket pocket, pulling out her grandfather's dog tag. The metal was cool, grounding. He once told her that stillness was both a gift and a curse, that the best shooters never panic, but they also never rest. When the plane touched down at Pope Army Airfield, dawn was breaking a thin gold line over the pine trees. The world looked untouched, unaware, as if the night before hadn't happened. Roth found her by the ramp as they disembarked. "Command's already writing up the report," he said. "They'll want you at debrief by 900. "Of course," she said. "You did good, Raina." His tone was genuine, but the word good stuck in her throat. She nodded, gave a small half-smile, and walked away. In the debrief room, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. A panel of officers listened while she recited the operation's details, distances, times, coordinates. Her voice stayed even, her tone measured. When she finished, one of the colonels leaned forward. "Sergeant Voss," he said, "that third engagement at 1100 meters, was that confirmed kill through thermal read?" "Yes, sir," she replied. "And wind compensation?" 14-mile-per-hour crosswind, 6-second rhythm," she said. "I fired at the downbeat." The colonel blinked, unsure whether to be impressed or unnerved. "Remarkable," he murmured, jotting a note. "Absolutely remarkable." When it ended, they thanked her, praised her, even offered to forward her name for commendation. She declined quietly. "Respectfully, sir, I'd rather it stay on record as team credit." They exchanged glances, surprised, maybe even confused. In a world that rewarded noise, her refusal to take credit sounded strange. Outside, the sun was sharp, the air heavy with the smell of asphalt. She took a long breath and walked toward the range. Not to shoot, just to stand there. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the distant echo of gunfire from a training lane nearby. It should have comforted her. Instead, it sounded like memory. Later, back in her quarters, she unpacked slowly. The rifle case sat open on her bunk. The bolt gleamed, everything in its place. Perfect, controlled, predictable. But her mind was. That night the dreams returned. Fragments of Afghanistan, Chen's voice, the scream on the radio before the roof collapsed in Syria. She woke at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, heart pounding. For a moment she wasn't sure where she was. The silence pressed against her like a weight. She swung her legs off the bed, sat in the dark, and whispered, "You're okay." It didn't sound convincing. When morning came, she forced herself into routine. PT, breakfast, classroom, smile when necessary, pretend to rest when told. The body complied, the mind didn't. Roth noticed before anyone else. "You're not sleeping," he said quietly one afternoon as she cleaned her weapon on the bench outside. "I'm fine," she said. He didn't argue, just stood there for a moment, then said, "You ever wonder what it costs you, all this control?" She kept her eyes on the rifle. "If I start wondering, I stop controlling." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's what I thought." He left and the silence returned, but his question stayed. It lingered through the evening, through the next range session, through every conversation she tried to escape politely. What did it cost her? She thought of her grandfather again, of how he used to sit on the porch, rifle across his knees, watching the desert sunset. He'd always said marksmanship was a conversation between you and the world. "You can't lie to a rifle," he'd told her once. "It knows when your hands are shaking." She understood that now more than ever. Her hands weren't shaking, but maybe that was the problem. A week later, command assigned her to a mentorship rotation, guest instructor at the Special Forces Sniper Course, Fort Bragg. It was supposed to be routine, but nothing felt routine anymore. On the first day, she met her new students, men and women who already knew her name. She didn't talk about the Syria mission. She didn't have to. The legend had already traveled faster than the truth. During the opening lecture, one trainee asked, "Ma'am, how do you handle fear before a shot?" She hesitated before answering. "I don't handle it," she said. "I listen to it." The room went still. "Fear tells you you're alive," she continued. "Control doesn't mean silence. It means choosing which noise you let guide you." When the class ended, they filed out quietly, more thoughtful than when they'd entered. Raina stayed behind, staring at the whiteboard. The words she'd said echoed back at her, choosing which noise you let guide you. She wasn't sure she believed it herself. That night she walked to the memorial wall outside the training compound, names etched into metal, a silent ledger of sacrifice. She ran her fingers along the cold surface, tracing the lines of letters she didn't know. Then she stopped at one name, Sergeant Lee Chen. Her chest tightened. She hadn't realized his name had been added here. She knelt, whispering under her breath, "We made it out, Chen. Someone always does." The wind shifted, carrying the faint rustle of pine needles, the same rhythm as the wind on the Texas ranch years ago. It sounded almost like an answer. A voice behind her broke the quiet. "Didn't know you had someone on this wall," Roth said. She didn't turn. "We all do, sir. Some we just carry longer." He came closer, his voice low. "You know, command wants you to put in for warrant officer, sniper instructor corps, permanent billet." She looked at the ground. "That mean less field work?" "Exactly." She was silent for a long moment. "I'm not sure I'm ready to stop listening out there." He nodded. "Then don't. But maybe start talking too. You can't keep living in the echo of everyone you've lost." The words cut deeper than he meant them to. She didn't respond. That night she wrote a letter she never sent. It wasn't to Chen or her grandfather or Roth. It was to herself. "You keep thinking silence will save you, but maybe it's only keeping you from hearing what's next." She folded it, tucked it inside the rifle case, between the cleaning cloth and the bolt assembly, where she'd find it again someday when she needed reminding. Weeks passed. Her teaching style changed. Softer now, still precise, still disciplined, but more human. She let trainees make mistakes and guided them through instead of correcting every detail. She talked about failure openly, about patience that sometimes hurt. One morning, during a long-range test, one of the younger soldiers missed 3 consecutive shots and slammed his fist on the mat. "I can't do this," he muttered. Raina knelt beside him. "You're listening too hard to the wrong voice," she said quietly. "What voice?" "The one that tells you you're supposed to be perfect." He looked up, eyes wide. "Aren't you?" She smiled faintly. "No, I'm just patient." He laughed nervously. She waited for him to breathe, then said, "Try again, not to hit, to learn." He fired. The shot landed just left of center, better. He exhaled, surprised. She nodded. "That's what learning sounds like." After that, word spread. She wasn't just the sniper who made the 1100-meter shot anymore. She was the one who listened, the one who taught differently, the one who made silence mean something else. Still at night, when the base quieted and the lights went out, the ghosts came back, the laughter from Little Creek, the scream from Syria, the crackle of Chen's radio. They came without judgment, just presence. And in a strange way, they no longer frightened her. They reminded her that silence wasn't empty. It was filled with everything that mattered. One evening, Roth found her again by the docks, staring at the water. The sun was low, the sky bleeding orange into gray. "You look tired," he said. "I am. Thinking of quitting." She shook her head. "No, just listening." He smiled softly. "To what?" "To what comes next." He nodded, understanding more than he said. Then quietly he added, "Whatever it is, Raina, don't face it alone." She turned to him, meeting his eyes. "No one really faces anything alone, sir. We just forget who's listening." The wind picked up, cool against their faces. She watched the ripples move across the water, calm, endless, reflecting the fading light. Sometimes, she thought, dignity doesn't speak. It just waits for its moment, then acts. White heavy checkmark, part 5 complete, ~1, 600 words. Would you like me to continue with part 6, where a new mission unexpectedly pulls Raina back into the field, forcing her to balance leadership, vulnerability, and the price of her own perfection? You said 6. ChatGPT said. Excellent, here is part 6, approximately 1,500 plus words. Continuing the same immersive, cinematic, emotionally layered tone. This part draws Raina back into the field when a new mission challenges her balance between discipline and compassion, and forces her to question the meaning of precision when human lives and moral choices blur together. Why do they always call when you've just started to feel human again? The orders arrived before sunrise, a knock on the door, a folder stamped operational priority, immediate deployment. Raina hadn't expected another mission so soon. The last one still lived under her skin, humming quietly whenever the world went too still. She opened the folder slowly, as if expecting it to bite. Inside, a satellite photo, a single paragraph of text in a time. Location, Northern Iraq. Objective, assist Special Operations Task Group with Overwatch during humanitarian extraction. Time on target, 48 hours. A humanitarian extraction. She'd done those before. They sounded clean, almost gentle, but nothing about pulling civilians out of a conflict zone was gentle. The word humanitarian only meant the uniforms were lighter and the targets harder to see. By mid-morning, she was at the airstrip, duffel in hand, her rifle case balanced perfectly on her shoulder. Roth met her there. His expression carried both pride and something heavier, worry. "You sure you want this one?" he asked. "Want doesn't matter," she replied. He exhaled slowly. "This isn't a test, Raina. It's real people this time, families, kids." Her jaw tightened. "Then we don't miss." He hesitated, then handed her a small envelope. "You'll understand later," he said. She didn't open it, just tucked it into her jacket pocket. The flight east was long and sleepless. Through the small window, she watched clouds blur into endless gray. Each hour brought her closer to another silence, another desert. When they landed, the air felt like heat made solid, heavy with dust, the horizon painted in faded beige. She was met by a small task group under the call sign Falcon 1. Their commander, Major Dane, was a man of quiet authority, tall, graying at the temples, eyes sharp. He shook her hand once. "Heard you're the best shot this side of the Atlantic," he said. She gave a faint smile. "Depends which side you're standing on." He laughed softly. "Good answer, here's the brief." They gathered around a map spread across the hood of a Humvee. The target area was a narrow valley just outside Mosul, an abandoned textile plant where a group of civilians had taken shelter from crossfire. Local militia forces were moving in from the east. The window for extraction was small, maybe 40 minutes of usable time. Raina studied the terrain lines. "Elevation here," she pointed, "gives me line of sight over the plant and both approach roads, but I'll need a secondary angle for the convoy route." Dane nodded. "We can get you a secondary post with our drone feed. You'll have visual and thermal overlay." "Any civilians armed?" "Unknown, that's the risk." She didn't answer. Civilians with rifles blurred every rule she'd ever followed. They rolled out at dusk, engines muffled, tires whispering over dust. The sky glowed orange, the color of endings. Her overwatch post was a rocky slope about a kilometer north of the target. She set up the M24, adjusted her bipod, and stared through the scope. The valley lay quiet, too quiet. "Falcon 1, this is Raven," she radioed softly. "Eyes on target, no visible hostiles." "Copy, Raven, convoy en route." The wind shifted, brushing against her face. She measured it by feel now, the way some people measure time. Minutes passed. Then movement, a group of figures emerging from the factory's shadows. Women, children, a few men carrying bags, civilians. The extraction had begun. Through the lens, she saw fear written in every gesture, hands clutching one another, eyes darting to the horizon. She remembered being taught once that the human body tells the truth long before the mouth does. These people were terrified. Then her scope caught something else, motion beyond the far ridge. 6 heat signatures moving low, fast. Falcon 1, incoming hostiles East Ridge closing fast. Distance 600. Confirmed, can you engage? Yes, but they're close to civilians. Need clear separation. Negative on delay. Take the shot when you can. Her heartbeat slowed 1, 2, 3. She tracked the lead target, waited for the civilians to duck behind the wall, then fired. Impact clean. The second went down before he hit the ground. The others scattered, firing wildly toward the plant. The sound of gunfire echoed off concrete, a terrible reminder of what she existed to prevent. Raven suppressing fire needed, Dane barked through comms. She pivoted, sighting 2 more hostiles advancing through smoke. Her trigger finger hesitated for half a breath. One of them looked young, barely 20. Fear written all over his movement, still armed, still aiming. She fired, both dropped. The last 2 retreated behind a burnt-out truck. Raven status. Area contained. Advise movement, she said quietly. Copy, convoy moving. As the vehicles pulled up, she kept scanning, eyes tracing every rooftop, every flicker of heat. And then she saw it, a shape too small to be a combatant, moving toward the truck wreckage. A child. A boy, maybe 8. He crawled through dust, clutching something shiny in his hands. Falcon, I've got a miner near the wreckage. Can't confirm object. Static answered, then hold fire. Through her scope, she saw the boy stop near one of the fallen hostiles, the young man she'd just shot. The child reached out, trembling, and pressed his hand against the man's still chest. Then he screamed, silent through the scope, but she felt it anyway. Her breath caught. The boy stood, still holding the metal object, a small photo frame, glinting in the dying light. He turned and ran toward the convoy. Raina lowered her rifle slowly. The world had gone too quiet again. When the extraction finished, the vehicles rolled back under the growing dark. She stayed behind for a few minutes, her rifle resting idle, the valley bathed in the red wash of sunset. She whispered into comms, Raven clear. The words came out flat, emotionless, but her throat ached. Back at base, Dane approached her, clapping her shoulder. Clean operation. You saved 23 lives. She nodded, but her eyes drifted past him to the boy sitting near the medic tent, clutching that photo frame against his chest. His face was blank, shocked, too young to understand. She turned away before Dane noticed. That night she couldn't clean her rifle. Her hands shook when she tried. She finally gave up, laying the weapon aside and sitting on the cot with her head in her hands. The image of the boy wouldn't leave her, his small silhouette against the smoke, the way he'd touched the body, the way the photo frame had caught the light like a signal. She remembered the envelope Roth had given her before the flight. Pulling it from her jacket, she opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten note. Raina, don't forget what your grandfather taught you. Every shot changes more than the target. Make sure you know who it echoes for. She stared at the words until they blurred. Then she folded the note, pressed it against her chest, and whispered, he was right. For the first time in years she cried, not for failure, not for loss, for understanding. In the morning she walked to the perimeter alone. The sun was just rising, washing the desert gold. She set the rifle on the ground and sat beside it, knees drawn up, the weight of silence around her again. She spoke softly, as if to the wind itself. Precision isn't peace. It's mercy we're supposed to aim for. The wind carried her words away, scattering them over sand and memory alike. Behind her, footsteps approached. It was Dane. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, hands on his hips. Then quietly he said, we got them all out, that kid too. He asked your name. She looked up slowly. What did you tell him? The truth, he said, that you were the one who made sure he could still run. She didn't respond, just looked out across the horizon where heat was already beginning to shimmer. Maybe someday, Dane said softly. He'll understand that mercy isn't clean either. She nodded faintly, eyes still distant. Maybe. When he walked away, she stayed there a while longer, watching the desert breathe, listening. The wind was gentle again, softer, almost forgiving. For the first time since she picked up a rifle, Raina didn't reach for it. She just let it rest beside her, a silent companion, no longer a shield, no longer a burden, just metal. And as the sun climbed higher, she whispered, barely audible, "Sometimes the hardest thing isn't pulling the trigger. It's knowing when to stop." How quiet could the world really get before it stopped feeling safe? When Raina landed back on U.S. soil, the air felt wrong, too soft, too clean, too ordinary. The kind of silence that wasn't peace, just absence. She stepped off the transport, boots hitting concrete with a hollow thud. The sun was setting behind the hangars, painting the horizon in slow, bleeding gold. Soldiers were laughing somewhere nearby, the kind of laughter that belonged to people who hadn't seen what she had. It should have been comforting. It was. Her gear felt heavier than usual, or maybe she was just tired of carrying it. At the terminal, Roth was waiting, no salute, no formal greeting. Just a quiet nod, a look that said more than words could. "How was it?" he asked. "Done," she said simply. He studied her for a second, then handed her a small folder. "Command signed off. You're officially cleared, and there's a week of leave in your file. Use it." "I don't really know what to do with leave," she said. "Then figure it out." He hesitated, then added, "You earned it, Raina, even if it doesn't feel like it." She gave a faint, humorless smile. "It never does." That night she drove east until the sky turned dark and the road ran out near the Carolina coast. The ocean waited beyond the dunes, endless, restless, alive. She parked near the beach, killed the headlights, and listened. The waves were softer than gunfire, but they still sounded like something breaking. For the first time in years, she wasn't surrounded by orders or coordinates or the hum of machinery, just wind and water, and the kind of silence that didn't ask her for anything. She stayed there until morning, letting the horizon burn itself into light. Later, she rented a small cabin inland, a temporary place that smelled faintly of pine and dust, the kind of place where people healed or hid, maybe both. Each day she tried to live like someone ordinary. Coffee in the morning, walks at sunrise, the sound of birds instead of bullets, but every small sound still triggered calculation, distance, direction, threat. Her body knew how to survive. It didn't know how to rest. She tried to sleep but dreamed of the boy in the valley, the small hands clutching that photo frame. Some nights, she dreamed of her grandfather instead, sitting on the old ranch porch with that quiet smile. "Still listening, Raina?" he'd ask. "Always," she'd whisper. And he'd nod, "Then you're still alive." The mornings after those dreams always hurt the most. One afternoon, she found herself driving aimlessly through town, small houses, old diners, families walking dogs. A different world. She stopped at a shooting range on the outskirts, one of those public ones where anyone could rent a lane for $20 an hour. She stood there for a long time, watching a father teach his teenage daughter how to aim. The girl flinched every time she fired, then laughed at her own mistake. The man laughed with her. No judgment, no pressure, just patience. Raina smiled, a small, genuine thing she hadn't felt in months. When they packed up, she walked over to the empty lane and rented a simple rifle, nothing fancy, just a civilian .308. She loaded a single round, breathed in, and fired. The sound echoed, familiar and foreign all at once. The target wasn't perfect, a few inches off center. She didn't adjust, just looked at the hole and thought, close enough. It was the first time she'd ever let herself miss on purpose. Later that evening, she stopped at a small diner by the highway. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, poured her coffee and asked, "Long day, hun?" "Long life," Raina said. The woman chuckled, "Aren't they all?" Raina smiled faintly, then glanced up at the TV above the counter, news footage of another conflict overseas. Different uniforms, same dust, same cries. The waitress noticed her stare. "You military." "Was," Raina said quietly. "Must have been tough." "Sometimes," Raina said. "Sometimes it was just quiet." The woman nodded, like she understood more than she said. "Quiet can be worse." When Raina left, the sky had gone dark again. She drove back to the cabin, headlights sweeping across the trees. The road curved sharply at the top of a ridge, revealing a clear view of the stars. She pulled over, stepped out, and stared upward. It hit her how long it had been since she'd looked up instead of down a scope. The stars were endless, precise, unflinching, silent. She whispered, "What do I do now?" No answer came, just wind through leaves, soft and indifferent. Inside the cabin, she sat by the window, pulled out her notebook and began writing, not mission logs this time, but thoughts. Scattered, raw, unfiltered. Words she hadn't allowed herself before. "I miss the noise because it tells me I'm needed. I miss the silence because it tells me I survived. I don't know how to live between the two." She closed the book, hands trembling slightly. The next morning she got a message from Roth. One line. "Command wants you to speak at the Little Creek dedication. The plaque's ready." For a long moment, she just stared at the message. That range, the same place where they'd laughed at her, doubted her, then watched her redefine their silence, was nomming a shooting lane after her. A small plaque at the 1,000-meter mark, inscribed with her name. She hadn't been back since that day. When she arrived a week later, the air smelled the same, salt and gunpowder and memory. The ocean's breath rolled through the range, carrying whispers of the past. A small crowd stood near the berm, instructors, trainees, a few old faces from the SEAL unit. Mitchell was there too, older, calmer, but with the same crooked smile. "Didn't think I'd see you again," he said as she approached. "Neither did I," she replied. He nodded toward the plaque. "They got it right, you earned that." She looked at it quietly. The engraving was simple. Dedicated to accuracy over assumption, in honor of Sergeant Raina Voss. Her throat tightened. When they asked her to speak, she almost refused, but Roth, standing nearby, gave a slight nod. So she stepped forward, looking out at the faces before her, younger, hopeful, untested. She cleared her throat. "I'm not great with speeches," she began, "but I know something about silence." The wind shifted, the group stilled. "When I first came here, people laughed. I don't blame them. I didn't look the part. Maybe I still don't." She paused, eyes distant. "But I learned something, that silence isn't weakness. It's where strength prepares itself." She looked down at the plaque again, tracing the etched letters with her glove. "I used to think the goal was to prove people wrong. It's not. The goal is to make the noise stop in yourself first. That's when you really see what matters." Her voice softened. "If you remember anything, remember this: precision isn't about being perfect. It's about caring enough to try when the world stops believing in you." She stepped back. The wind filled the pause like applause that didn't need sound. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Mitchell approached her again. "You still shoot like that day?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe better." He grinned. "Figures, some of us peaked early." They laughed, quiet, genuine. When the sun began to set, Raina stayed behind, alone at the 1,000-meter line. The air was cooler now, the light softer. She placed her hand on the plaque one last time and whispered, "Grandpa, I did it right this time." The breeze answered, soft, approving. As she turned to leave, a young female trainee called out from the firing line, "Sergeant Voss, can you show me how to read the wind like that?" Raina paused, then smiled. "No," she said gently, "but I can teach you how to listen." The girl frowned, not yet understanding, and Raina chuckled softly. "You'll get it," she said, "when the world gets loud enough." She walked away then, her silhouette fading against the glowing sky, small, quiet, unshakable. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It just walks forward. What does a soldier become when the war stops calling her name? For Raina Voss, it took years to find the answer and even longer to accept it. Months passed after the ceremony at Little Creek. The world didn't stop turning, didn't pause to honor her discipline or her precision. New trainees filled her place. New wars whispered for attention. That was how it always went. But for the first time, she didn't feel left behind. She felt released. Her mornings began in quiet coffee steaming on the porch of a small house she'd bought just outside Fayetteville. The porch faced east, where the dawn light broke over pine trees and turned the mist gold. The world was softer here, kinder, the kind of peace that used to make her restless. Now she let it stay. The rifle case still sat in the corner of her study, untouched, cleaned, oiled, ready. She didn't avoid it, but she didn't reach for it either. Sometimes she'd glance toward it the way you might glance toward a photo of someone who used to define you, not with longing but with gratitude. The letters started coming around that time, from soldiers she'd trained, from recruits who'd heard the stories, from one young woman in particular, a sniper candidate from Fort Benning who wrote, "Ma'am, they said I wouldn't pass, that I was too quiet, too small. But then someone showed me your name. I just wanted you to know I didn't quit." Raina kept that letter pinned to the wall above her desk. Some days, it was all the reminder she needed, that what we endure becomes someone else's permission to keep going. The seasons shifted. Autumn came, sharp and orange and fleeting. With it came an invitation from Fort Bragg, guest lecture, the psychology of the shot. She almost declined. But something in her stirred, not pride, not nostalgia, just the sense that the story wasn't over until she passed it forward. When she arrived, the base hadn't changed much. The same smell of oil and earth, the same wind humming through range flags, but she had changed. The tension that once lived in her shoulders had eased. The silence that once weighed her down now felt lighter, like air she could finally breathe. Inside the lecture hall, rows of trainees sat waiting. Most had already heard of her. A few whispered when she entered. She didn't care. She learned to let awe and skepticism sound the same. Both were just noise before understanding. She began without notes. "When you pull the trigger," she said softly, "you're not aiming at a target. You're aiming at a moment, a decision. You can't control where the bullet lands after that. You can only control the intention behind it." The room stilled. "Every shot," she continued, "tells two stories, the one they record and the one you carry." She paused, scanning the faces. Some were eager, some unsure, some pretending not to feel anything at all. She recognized all of them, pieces of who she used to be. "One day," she said, "you'll realize that the hardest thing isn't hitting the target. It's deciding which ones are worth hitting." Her voice softened, lower now, almost a whisper. "And when you can't tell the difference anymore, it's time to go home." Silence filled the room, but it wasn't the kind that isolates, it was the kind that heals, the kind that waits patiently for truth. Afterward, one of the trainees approached her, a young man with nervous hands and honest eyes. "Ma'am," he said, "how do you live with the ones you couldn't save?" Raina took a breath. "By remembering the ones you did," she said, "and forgiving yourself for not being God." The young man nodded slowly, eyes wet. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You'll understand one day, but I hope it takes you a long time." When the lecture ended, she walked the range one last time. The wind was steady that afternoon, 5 miles per hour, no shift. She smiled at the predictability of it. For years she had tried to measure the wind, control it, master it. Now she simply let it pass. On the horizon, she could almost see her grandfather's ranch, the memory of that dry Texas heat, the coyote calls echoing through dusk. She could hear his voice again. "Don't fight the wind, Raina. Just learn to breathe with it." She whispered, "I finally did." That evening she drove west. No destination, just direction. The road stretched ahead, infinite and forgiving. The radio played quietly, a song she didn't know, soft and slow. The sky darkened into indigo. Stars returned, countless and patient. Somewhere around midnight she stopped by an overlook. The valley below shimmered faintly under moonlight. She stepped out of the car, breathed the cold air and closed her eyes. In that moment the ghosts didn't speak. They didn't have to. They just stood with her Chen, her grandfather, the boy in the desert, even the men who once laughed at her, not as weight anymore, as witness. She smiled through tears that came without sadness, just release. Her phone buzzed once, a message from Roth. Got your letter from that trainee. You're still changing lives, Voss, even without the rifle. She typed back, maybe that's the point. Then she turned off the phone and looked at the stars again, bright, unwavering, scattered across the endless dark like bullet holes punched into heaven. She thought about everything she'd learned, about how the world measures strength in noise but forgets that silence carries its own gravity, about how sometimes leadership isn't commanding but listening, and how the bravest thing she'd ever done wasn't a shot, but the choice to stop shooting. The wind picked up again, gentle against her face. She let it pass through her hair, through the loose collar of her jacket, through the open quiet of her chest. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a soldier. She just felt human. When dawn began to break, painting the sky in soft gold, she whispered to no one and everyone all at once. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And with that she got back in the car, started the engine and drove toward the light. The rifle would stay locked away, untouched but not forgotten, a part of her story, not her definition. The silence, once a burden, had become something else entirely, a companion, a truth. As the sun rose higher, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror, calm, strong, and just a little surprised by her own peace. The road stretched on. The wind hummed softly through the open window. Somewhere faintly, she thought she heard her grandfather's laughter, not proud, not solemn, just warm. And Raina smiled, because for once she wasn't aiming anymore. She was finally free to live.